playoff picture becomes a bit clearer? We get into it next on Beyond the Locker Room. What a week, what a weekend of games. I mean, we will get in a little bit on Thursday night on its own in a second, but my goodness. NFL delivered this weekend with some very compelling matchups and some incredible finishes, like crazy stuff that we're seeing. And today I'm gonna kind of just pull things back a little bit. We're gonna zoom out, what they say, 50,000 foot level. We're gonna kind of see what's going on in the playoffs as we only got a few weeks left. 2 games left for most people in the schedule, with the exception of the Colts and 49ers as I'm recording this. We're going to kind of get the lay of the land and see what things look in each conference, and who's in, who's out, and who's hanging on by a thread. Pretty much, you could consider this as kind of the way we're going to break this down. Let's get into the AFC first. And I'm gonna probably weave some of the games that that I watched this weekend, my observation from those games in this discussion, in this review of the different conferences, what we see. So, AFC wise, Broncos right now have the 1 seed. Patriots after the big win last night, the Baltimore. Thank you very much, New England. Thank you, P-Men, for that. We'll get in the reason why in a moment. They came through a big win against Baltimore in Baltimore. So that was impressive. So those 2 seeds right now, they have clinched a playoff spot. So they're in. Now the question is who's coming in the mix now after them? So in the AFC we have at least, I would say, right now we have Jaguars at 3, leading the South, and I think they're closing in on pretty much locking that up pretty soon. I think if the Colts lose tonight, they might be in, I believe, as far as that goes. Steelers, they're at 9-6. Don't ask me how, but they're there. Tomlin, I will never doubt you again. My gosh, how that happened, I am still scratching my head. We'll get to that in a second. Chargers at 11-4. They are the 5th seed at this point here, which is still, because they dropped down, because they're second behind Denver, even though they have a better record than Pittsburgh, and because Pittsburgh is the divisional leader, and they'll get their only way that AFC North team's going to get in the playoffs is if they win the division. And then the Bills, in this case here right now, are the 6th seed right now at 11-4 at the moment. So that's where they're at, and then the Texans finally kind of rounding things up from the South, and they're 10-5 right now. Boy, have they turned it on, in the second half of the season. And that defense is something to be feared. Let me tell you that. Something to be feared. On the bubble in the AFC right now, and right now, as I mentioned, I mentioned those Colts. They're hanging on by a thread. And I don't know, with about 50 or 45-year-old Phil Rivers, what they're going to do against San Francisco, but wish them luck. They are playing at home, I believe, in this game, so that is some advantage, but they are hanging on by a thread. The only way Baltimore is going to get in right now after the loss of New England, they're in the 9th seed technically, and they're not eliminated yet, is that they got to win out, which means beating the Steelers in Pittsburgh and winning out the rest of their games. I can't remember who they play next in this case here off the top of my head. Steelers do get Cleveland, so that they could technically wrap things up. They could take care of business next weekend, but that's the only way Baltimore's getting in right now. And I'm not sure at this point what happened, with Lamar's injury and stuff like that, but ain't looking good. And I think these are the last days of this Harbaugh being a head coach, at least in Baltimore. I think it's coming to an end, or it will come to an end in a couple weeks. Going back to some of the stuff in the AFC, just to kind of talk about that for a second. Pittsburgh, as I said before, I don't know how they did it. One of the crazier endings I've ever seen. I'll get the craziest ending probably I've ever seen in this case here. You see I'm wearing my jersey, my Joey G jersey. I'm a Michigan man, I know, but I know he's from the Ohio State. But as a Seahawks man, Joey Galloway is my boy. Anyways, I rock this Galloway jersey. What I'm going to get to a little later on when I get over to the NFC. But as far as the AFC goes, Steelers found a way. By the way, I don't know what the Steelers, what the referees were mulling about for 10 minutes at the end of this game. You call the flag on St. Brown. If you call the flag on Detroit, the game is over. Clock runs off. You can't continue after a penalty on the offense. So I'm not sure what they're going back and forth. Maybe they're checking out dinner plans. I don't know what it was, but that was a whole bunch of melodrama for absolutely nothing. Good stand by the Steelers defense. I was sitting there going like, boy, this don't look good. Because Detroit obviously a potent offense and giving them 4 shots at it, but they kind of stubbed themselves in the toe with a couple penalties, which helped the Steelers out a bit, where they were able to drop 8 back. Heck, I think on the last play they dropped 9 back. They were only rushing 2. I think it's Highsmith. I can't remember who the other person was they were rushing. It might have been Hayward, and everybody else was just dropped back in coverage. But the thing is with Pittsburgh, I wasn't sure they could hold out for 4 straight downs. They had a similar situation, earlier in the game. I think it was the third quarter where they held firm and props the Steeler defense. As I said before, with so many different injuries, Porter even got banged up late in the game. I mean, obviously Watt being out, and I'm not sure when he will be back. The Steelers found a way, and let me tell you something. They got to take care of business next week. It's pretty much a guarantee that DK Metcalf will not be playing next week. I don't know yet. I haven't heard the details about it, but I'm pretty sure that fan in Detroit pretty much talked about his mama or talked about his woman. One or the other, if not both. And some lines, man, listen, I am not, in this case, condoning anyone throwing a punch at anyone or slapping anyone or putting a jab at anyone. Keep your hands to yourself, as I always say to everybody, including my kids, keep your hands to yourself. I'll say this, though. The old Chris Rock joke, I understand. Okay, because these fans that come in here think, in this case, they have some type of right, as if they have some type of immune system or some type of, special, security bubble or force field, like it's Star Trek. They got some force field that no one will touch or say anything or do anything to them. And they can say wherever they want, any, thing you could think of out of their mouths, without actually getting any repercussions whatsoever by either the NFL, the home team, or in this case, players taking vigilante action. We saw it in this case a few years ago. I think it was in Kansas City, I believe, with Adams. Like, look, man, guys, you got to respect the players' boundaries in this case. You can't be just saying, and we see it playing in the NBA, by the way. You can't just be saying anything that comes out of your mouth that you would never say on the streets. You never say on the streets. And yet somehow you feel you can come inside of a stadium and say anything, that you want, beside a child of God, in this case, to a player, and think there will be no repercussions by any entity. As I said before, I'm not suggesting in this case or condoning anything that Metcalf did, but to quote the old Chris Rock line, I understand. I'll leave it there. I don't expect to see him play next week. Jaguars quietly putting together a nice season. We've talked about it a few times on the pod before. As you can see, they've kind of minimized the errors and when it comes to Trevor Lawrence. I'm not saying he's a game manager because I don't want, relax here. The 3 Jaguars fans in this case that might be watching the pod, relax. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in this case here, they've minimized the potential errors with him and kind of letting him grow at a slower pace in this case. And I think it's worked wonders for them as a team. So the Jaguars looking good. And hey, shout out to the AFC South, which is always kind of the old phrase will say the redheaded stepchild. Once again, no disrespect any redheads, no disrespect any stepchildren. Just saying it's an old-fashioned phrase in this case here. No one respects the AFC South, and the AFC usually has a mediocre type of record sometimes, or in this case, some nondescript teams. But the AFC South quietly has put together a nice catalog of, players, you could say, and big-time quarterbacks coming out of the AFC South, in the future. So we'll see what that looks like. But, you throw in, Stroud plus, Trevor Lawrence, at some point I think Richardson will get his opportunity again in Indianapolis. And, and we'll see what happens in this case, later on with, who's the other team I'm forgetting from there? Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Houston, and who is the other team I'm forgetting from there? Come on, folks, give me the AFC South. Oh, Titans. Yes, Titans. They're probably gonna be. I don't know. They're probably being a hunt for a quarterback again. They got Cam Ward. They just got him last year, so Ward is gonna be all right too. So I think they have some nice young quarterbacks coming out of that division. It will be a fascinating division to watch the next few years as those quarterbacks grow. But AFC, point on the Bills. I know Shedeur played pretty well before the finger injury. I think he'll be fine. But Bills, man, it was shoddy. That's the word I say. It was shoddy. That ain't really make me want to shout. Buffalo fans. I don't know about that. Chargers were a strong win in Big D. Salting things away. I suspect they're going to be in pretty much pretty soon. I think I think a lot depends also with the Colts game as well too. I think the Jaguars are pretty much in. The Colts get dealt with, I think, this on Monday. So we'll see on that front. To the NFC. Oh my goodness. Woo! As I said before, great finishes this weekend. The NFC delivered for sure on the great finishes. So my beloved Seahawks are the number one overall seed right now in the NFC. Seattle, I don't know how they did it, but they somehow found a way to do it. But they're now number one seed. They control their own destiny. They and the Niners will have a big game at the end of the season. That could be for all the marbles. We'll see. It also depends a lot on this game that's coming up on Monday night. So you can see the implications of this Monday night game. The 2 seed right now are the Bears, and props to them. They were fantastic. You gotta give them their due, man. You gotta give them their due, man. They did their stuff. Before I get into the Bears, let's just take a moment to kind of recollect and kind of like marinate on what we saw on Thursday night with Seattle at LA, which might have been the best game of the season. I think the Seahawks were down 16 points in the fourth quarter. And believe me, you know me, I don't have much faith in Sam Darnold. My man who's a Vikings fan, but boy, he is giving me well-versed and and sage advice when it comes to rooting for Sam Darnold on your team. Take it with a grain of salt. I've had that mindset all year with Seattle. But I think last week or the week before, I said, hey, man, they might look into this 1 seed. I was seeing where this was going. Obviously, this big game was a big determining factor on if they could get there. Great call. I mean, first thing, the 2-point conversion, that was a 2-point conversion, then was a 2-point conversion. I tell you, if the Seahawks get the Super Bowl, that's still a big if, but if they get the Super Bowl, or even if, say, the NFC Championship game is playing in Seattle with the 12th man, instead of saying San Francisco or Chicago, or even in this case, Los Angeles, they won the game. That 2-point conversion, I mean, it's going to ring so huge as we enter into that game, if that scenario plays out where Seattle's hosting any of those teams, especially LA. Because, and don't get me wrong, I said before, I was happy about the Seahawks fan. I say, wait, is it a touchdown? But the fact that the whistle blew, which is a legit point. The whistle blew. It should be a dead play. How Sherman picks up the ball and it's like, oh, now it's live. Like, and I thought I was gonna play out again the Steelers-Lions game. So that's the only thing that had me wondering, like, what are they up to? But I was thinking, no. Rule books in this case here, offensive penalty, it's a wrap. But the fact that in this case here, it looks like they were kind of making up on the fly a little bit was was a little disconcerting, to say the least. And that's something the competition could be is got to clean up next year, because that seemed to be a loophole that hadn't been determined or discovered or figured out quite yet. Obviously, at the end of the game, the post-game press conference, McVay was none too pleased, but he was seething, but he held it back. So, he wanted to keep that money in his pocket. So he held it back well enough. But I in a way, I can't blame him on that one. But I love the going for 2 in the overtime, because I was thinking the same thing. And once it got over midfield, I'm like, there's no reason for us to actually look for a tie with about 4 minutes left to go in the game, because either give Stafford more enough time to actually milk the clock and maybe kick a field goal and go home, or it ends up being a scenario where you end up with a tie, and that's not serving Seattle any good. So go for it and see what happens. Props, that second 2-point conversion was much better. Darnold moved around the pocket well enough, to kind of wait for someone to get open. He found the big tight end. I mean, hey man, that crowd was hot. Let me tell you, it was hot. It was hot in Seatown. But boy, lo and behold, the Seahawks are right there, man. So we'll see where things go. As I mentioned, the Bears are number 2 with another crazy finish. Hey man, all you folks were downing Caleb last year and like, oh, he's a bust, he's a this, he's a that. Let me tell you something. There's a reason why he was number 1 pick overall. And boy, let me tell you something. when they showed the stat that dude already had like 5 game-winning drives in the last minute or something like that, or some crazy stat like that the Bears had, which is like the most they ever had in their entire franchise, or some crazy stat like that. Don't quote me on it, but Fox put it up there. But the stat was just mind-blowing how many times this team has come back this year. And then to do it again. And the fact that Caleb finds a way to bring up his best stuff and his, the things that he used to get kind of chastised about last year, and even in college, like, boy, I don't know, man. He's got to stay more disciplined. His improvisational type of habits, that could come back cost him in the NFL. Well, quite honestly, for the most part, that's what bailed him out in this case. A lot of times in these close games, and he did it again on Saturday night with an incredible play off the back foot. Finds the rookie just strolling down the back end of the end zone wide open. But he made some great throws. The one to DJ Moore in this case here for the touchdown. Oh my gosh, was that pass. That was a thing of beauty. That one of the best, he had some of the best passes I've seen, I think the week before when they're playing, it was them they're playing? Yeah, I think, it was them a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, it was a couple of weeks ago. Him and Jordan Love again, just putting on an arm show with some great passes. Right? Remember, he threw a couple on the sidelines were just ropes. This one, the Moore catch was fantastic too. So props the Moore, but the pass, man, oh my gosh! And in that climate, that was sweet, boy. Tasty, man, tasty. All right, man. Bears looking good. That's where my man Garth, man. He knows where he's at. He knows what I'm talking about. You finally got a quarterback. You finally got a quarterback. Only took about 30, 40 years, but you finally got one. Eagles at 3. There's no teams more mercurial than the Philadelphia Eagles. They are dangerous at 3. I don't trust them as if I'm another team because they're the one team in this bunch in all the playoffs because they're the champs. They can flip a switch. And I think you gotta be wary of that with Philadelphia. Sometimes you gotta let sleeping dogs lie. Philadelphia's a dangerous team. Don't mind their struggles right now. Philadelphia's a dangerous team. We discussed a bit of the Rams. The Rams have had some interesting games against top competition, and they haven't fared too well, to be honest with you. Stafford's gonna do Stafford stuff, but I get in this case here. I heard Colin Cowherd mention this the other day that he's the last great pocket passer in the game. I would agree with that, but my concern with that is that we saw it last year against Philadelphia, where you can't if you have a guy who can't move around the pocket, man, in this day and age, it's gonna come to cost you in the playoffs because everyone's scheming for you now. So now you gotta find ways to make plays in this case that are not in the drawing board that people have not scouted for, and that's where the improvisation comes in and the running and the moving around the pocket. And I think this is where things get trouble for guys like Stafford and guys like Goff. Tomlin mentioned it at halftime. You move them off the spot, they're less dangerous. And we saw it in this case. We saw it in this case here with Stafford with his pass essentially ended the game. You got when you got to move and run. You can't make the plays as accurate in this case when he's throwing and running. We'll get to another team where we saw that with later on as well too. But Rams, I don't know, man. And they got some big injuries, too. That's the other thing, too. So we'll see. McVay's a great coach. We'll see what he figures out. But, that loss was a tough loss. And now they're rivals in this case here. Seattle and LA's rivals. The old 49ers. The Bay Area kids. San Fran plays on Monday night. Obviously, a huge game. We talked about it before. They still have a shot as the number 1 overall seed. I think right now the number 1 overall seed is pretty much within grasp of potentially 4 teams. Philly's out of it, but I think the Rams might have a backdoor chance of getting in there somehow. I don't know how. I don't think they can, because unless Seattle loses, and then Seattle will have to lose, but then I think Seattle still has a tiebreaker. So it's gonna be hard for the Rams. I think the Rams are out for that. But Chicago and San Francisco still have a viable chance of being the number 1 seed overall. So San Fran needs to win this game against the Colts and then try to see if they can take care of business against Seattle. But they should have their way with this Colts quarterback situation, but based on what we've seen the last 3-4 days in the NFL, stranger things have happened. It is that time of year. Christmas Day, I heard. My wife's waiting for the show. Teams in the hunt right now on the NFC side. Panthers and Packers. Wow. Panthers right now, first let me start with them. I mean, props to the Panthers right now. They're the 4 seed at the moment, so technically in the hunt because they haven't really solidified anything yet. But that win against Tampa Bay on Sunday, and going back to the point about pocket passers, Baker has some mobility. I'm not saying he's quite like the other two guys like Goff and Stafford, but he too is not great on the move when he has to move and throw. And that pass, where I'm not sure who zigged and who zagged, but someone zigged and someone zagged, where Mike Evans turned it in, almost like a button hook or something like that, and, Baker thought he was going to flare out. Pitt goes to Carolina, game, set, match, as they say, and now they control their own destiny now, to take, hopefully, to take care of business. We'll see if they can do so with 2 games left. But Bryce Young, man, props to him. I mean, people had him pretty much, sitting on a bench for the rest of his career, and look now, man. So it's sometimes amazing when you get some better coaching and some folks actually have confidence in you, and you work on your game as well too. So we'll see. They still have to play Tampa later on again. So we'll see how that works out. And I think right now they're the driver's seat. Tampa's right now struggling badly with a lot of injuries. The offense hasn't been clicking pretty much for the second half of the season, and I think they're looking to be put out the pasture, quite honestly, with Tampa. And it's not anything to do with anything with the coaching, anything. I think it's just bad luck with the injuries, and it kind of really blunted their momentum. And I don't think they're going to be able to hang on here to get this division. I think Carolina's going to take it, but hey, as I mentioned in my previous segment, stranger things have happened. As far as Green Bay goes, and we've talked about them a lot. Heck, I started off when I brought back the pod about a Packers podcast about the trade to Micah Parsons. And now what we've seen now, Micah Parsons no longer right now playing on the team at the moment, and the Packers right now are right now in the 7th seed at the moment, and they're hanging on by a thread, when it comes to that. In the hunt at the moment to get that 7th seed. We'll see, because their quarterback situation is dicey. If Jordan Love could come back, they're fine. If he can't come back, watch out. It's trouble. And heck, Willis didn't look that great actually too when he got just pounded by Sweat, man. I think, man, Chicago's beat you up though, man. They remind me a bit of the Steelers in that sense, man. If you give your quarterback a good dose of exposure to the Chicago front four, you will be paying the price, folks. You will be paying the price. So we'll see if they can hang on. Detroit still kind of mulling about in this case here. We'll see. Detroit can get it done. I don't know if Detroit. I think they got Minnesota that's still playing. They got somebody else to still play in their division. So we'll see. Detroit, I just don't know, man. Because of Green Bay's injury situation, I think Detroit might still have a shot. But so many of the tiebreakers go against them, which is the problem. And we mentioned Tampa Bay situation. Obviously, they got to win out. Probabilities are going to be fascinating to see right now. Going into it, I think they have 58% possibility of getting the playoffs, and Carolina 42. I believe that's changed now since obviously Carolina won the game, and they're now 7-8. So it's and technically the 10th seed now. It's in the AFC South is very similar to the NFC North. You got to win or go home. Like, you got to win the division. There's no getting it any other way. So